You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, episode number 171. There's nothing more nasty than giving kids hope and then snatching it away as fast as you can. Brad Silberling.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie is going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. Today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle Pro, our private and growing community for filmmakers and screenwriters. It was created for film creatives like you to meet, network, and support each other, learn from film industry experts, and to get the answers to your burning questions and more. The journey in this business is rough. There is no guarantee to success, but your chances of reaching your goals dramatically improve when you find others who are on the same journey as you and you work together towards a common goal. That is why I put together IFH Pro. Inside, you'll get professional networking, private and safe spaces to discuss the film business, access to advanced tools and education, up-to-date education, exclusive content not available publicly, access to IFH Pro workshops, webinars, special guests, and so much more. If you want to check it out, head over to indiefilmhustle.com/pro. Well, guys, I promised you a special episode, and I hope I deliver with this one. We have on the show today writer-director Brad Silberling. Now, I've had a long love affair with Brad from a distance for a long time. I love his films. He made films like City of Angels, Casper, Lemony Snickett, and also has worked on some amazing television shows like Jane the Virgin, Dynasty, Charmed, LA Law, NYPD Blues, Doogie Howser, and many, many more. And I sat down with Brad and talked to him about his journey, what it's like having a mentor like Steven Spielberg in your life, and how he's been able to overcome a lot of the obstacles that this business throws in front of all of us. So without any further ado, please enjoy my inspiring conversation with Brad Silberling. I'd like to welcome to the show Brad Silberling. How you doing, Brad?
I'm excellent, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I am humbled and honored. As I was telling you before, you and I met in 2005 at my first Sundance, and you were speaking, had a fantastic panel, and I got a picture with you. I'll see if I could put it in the show notes. I have it in my archive somewhere. And you were very kind to a young filmmaker, just asking probably stupid questions. Like, how do I get an agent? Like, dumb price stuff at the time, but you were very kind. I never forgot you. And I followed your career as you moved forward. And the other day, I was like, I got to get Brad on the show, see if he'd be interested in coming on the show. And here you are, sir.
Here I am, direct from the San Fernando Valley to you.
So how did you get started in this ridiculous business that we love so much?
I'm not alone. I was a kid with a camera. I was a kid with a Super 8 camera here in the Valley. And it's interesting because my dad, who passed away 8 years ago, he was a documentary producer. He I was born in D.C. because he was working for the USIA, which is actually our government's propaganda arm. We do have one.
No.
And he was producing documentaries during the Kennedy administration. And only in the 60s would logic have dictated that he would move from that job into network television. Don't ask how they made that leap. It was a smaller business then. So we moved out to LA in 67, and he started working at that point at ABC as a programming executive. So oddly enough, they thought his skills would translate. So he worked as a network executive the whole time I was growing up, but he always loved production. And so I took advantage of that I would go beg to be dropped off at a set at any point I could, from probably about age 9. When I was old enough to ride a bike, I would steal over to Universal. I'd met a really nice secretary who would like slip me call sheets in a drive-on, which was a bicycle. Mm-hmm. And I would spend every Friday afternoon there. But I just was fascinated by the process. And again, my dad was always coming at everything from a story perspective. But I'm that guy who, I still hadn't really picked up a camera. I was just absorbing. And then I was there that first day in 1975, first day for showing of Jaws. I made my dad drop me off. We had a theater called The Plit. It was in Century City where ABC was, where he was working. And I begged him to just drop me off. It was like an 11 a.m. showing. And I'm sitting there alone. The theater was not full, even though obviously in days to come, it was going to be incredibly full. Huge airplane kind of recliner seats. I'm alone in my row. And I get to the attack on little Alex Kintner, the kid on the raft. And I'm just having a heart attack. And I don't know if I can make it through the movie, looking around to see if there's anybody there. But I hung in, thank God. And by the time it was done, I had that feeling, which was, who got to do that? Who did that? Who took me through that ride? That is something I will never get out of my system. And I went home that day and snuck into my dad's photography closet. He had a Minolta Super 8 camera, and I started shooting
that day.
So it was just like the switch was thrown. And Steven's really funny about this because I'm not alone. I mean, I can tell you the number of other filmmakers who were switched on in that moment by that movie. And so I started shooting. Yeah, so I was shooting I did 2 things in junior high school. In high school, I shot movies and I played soccer. And that was what I did. And this was Super 8 again, where it wasn't. I mean, I look at everybody now with their phones and what's possible. And back then you're shooting 3.5-minute cartridges. Every second counted. You had to really, so you're cutting in the camera. You're really thinking through your material. You're splicing your little, Super 8 splices. So that's what I did. And I was very obsessed. And I did that right up through, I got a lot of good advice to not do film as an undergrad, but to try to actually learn anything else, have sort of more of an open humanist mind, start writing. And so then I went to grad school and I went to UCLA. I made, SC is more famous for its, thesis final films, whatever they're called. But I made my thesis film, and I was fortunate. We fought to have our first industry screening because UCLA was super egalitarian and they didn't normally like things like that, but we did. And so coming out of that screening, I ended up going under contract. I went under contract to Universal. There had been a woman there who's still a great friend, Nancy Nayer. She ran casting at Universal. She was there just to troll for actors. She saw my film and she said, "Would you mind if I took your film back to the studio?" And I was like, "Yeah."
No, please don't.
Please don't. Can I walk you to your car? I mean, it was crazy. And so I got a really funny set of phone calls one was from the TV group and one was from the feature group. And again, at that point in time, they did not communicate. They still don't often. And they basically both wanted to try to put together some sort of a deal. They hadn't really done term deals for directors since like the early 70s.
Like Spielberg.
So
like when Steven got it.
Spielberg, Richard Donner, a number of these guys who basically were on term deals. And so they dusted off an old term deal, and they just, like, he's young, he's cheap, hopefully, some talent, let's do this. And they covered everything from writing, directing, producing, making omelets. They had me, but it was incredible. So I was prepared to start, parking cars out of grad school. But I went under contract. So that meant immediately trying to figure out who's producing on the lot. Is there television? Who's making movies? And that became home for the first 2.5, 3 years that I got started. And then ironically, Stephen Bochco and his then sort of in-house director, a really great guy named Greg Hoblet, saw my graduate film and they said, come over here. And Universal was very wise because they're like, well, good, let them go fuck up on their on their dime. So so my first 3 years of work were directing television primarily over at Bochco's company.
So I have to ask you though, because looking through your filmography, you have the distinct honor of being one of the directors who directed an episode of the infamous Cop Rock.
I'm one of only 11, and the original order was for 12, and they killed it before they even went to 12. I remember Steven coming down the set one day, and he was just like, well,
this didn't work.
It was my second hour of television. It was crazy.
I mean, so for people listening, if you don't know what Cop Rock is, Google it on YouTube and watch a scene of Cop Rock. It was this musical cop show, which is such an oddity in television history. From such a big, Steven Bochco was like, he was the dude. He was it. So it'd be the equivalent of, I don't know, whoever nowadays, big showrunner, Shonda Rhimes doing a cop musical. And it was, I saw some, I never seen a full episode because I didn't see it when it got released, and I don't know whatever's on YouTube, but I just remembered these cops just like singing about drugs, and it was just the weirdest thing. And when I saw it, I had to ask you, what was it like being inside of that?
Here's the truth of it. So Stephen had seen, there was a great British series called The Singing Detective. Mm-hmm. And I think he was feeling his muscle and feeling his strength and thinking, I can do anything. Mm-hmm. Let's do that. The problem is Stephen didn't really, and God bless him, he passed away a few years ago. He was an amazing guy. He didn't really care about music. Didn't really like it. So this was the problem. And, the whole idea in musicals is you only burst out into song when you have to, when basically the spirit moves and the story needs it. But he didn't approach it that way. The Cop Rock outlines were like normal Hill Street. It was like procedural, maybe a song in here. So that was the problem. They were wedged in, which meant that in production they came very late. So it wasn't like you had this great Steven Spielberg talks about this beautiful process on West Side Story about working for 6 months, even as they're doing the choreography. And to say, Cop Rock, you would be shown the number on the day of shooting because the music had only just gotten to the choreographer who's kind of winging it. And so all the actors are like, the fuck? But it was recorded live in terms of the singing, which also is usually you do, like a pre-record. It was crazy. And yet there would be, there were numbers that kind of worked. And then there were a lot of them we call groaners that were just like, oh no. And you just felt for these actors who had to commit. And, again, so it was an exercise in insanity. And like I said, it was not, if somebody who just loved the musical form had tried it, maybe it would work. But anyway, it was good. But that was my second hour of television.
So,
And I was like, all right.
so is this what I'm doing? Is this how it?
Doing great. Okay, you go over there. You dance to the locker. You get your gun. Let's do this.
And you've never directed a musical at this point in your life?
No, of course. Of course.
Because how many people have really directed musicals? So that list is fairly short.
Correct.
So you're there as a young, how old are you at this point? 22, 23?
I was probably 25, 20. Yeah, I was probably 25.
25 years old, second time. My God. All right. So let me ask you the first day, because I always love asking this question. The first day on the first job that you got after you signed that deal with Universal, when you walk on set, I gotta believe you're losing your mind. The imposter syndrome is running rampant. You're like, any moment now, security is going to escort me off the lot. How did you walk on and do your job with all of that? I mean, I'm assuming. So am I correct?
Well, you're right. You're assuming, and your assumption would be correct. But for three things, I'll tell you two different stories, but for three things. One is, I even remember when I got my contract, everyone was like, oh my God, are you losing your mind? And I wasn't, and it wasn't hubris, but I felt like I'd been doing what I was doing for a long, long time. And I trusted myself. I felt like, oh, okay, I've got more than just the kid next door to be my crew now. This is good. So my crew got bigger. But the single biggest reason, my Canadian friends are going to kill me. But the single biggest reason I didn't fully have that was my first episode for Universal ended up being in Toronto. They were doing a second batch of Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Right. Yeah.
And so I finagled my way into one of those. And I swear, I don't know what it was, but I was not intimidated by the Canadian crew. And I was working, it was awesome. I was working with Mike Connors, Mannix.
Oh,
he was my lead. And couldn't have been more dear and awesome. And so I just thought, of course, why not me? So that part didn't really overwhelm me. I felt fine. I'll tell you, the moment that you're thinking of, it was less imposter than just how did this happen? So that's my first directing job in television. My first feature directing job is Casper. And we're shooting in 1994. As I've told you, I picked up a camera because of Steven. Steven ended up becoming my mentor and giving me my first feature job. And the first morning of our shoot, we were shooting in the big kitchen. There was a big, long kitchen sequence that was going to end up having more CG than all of Jurassic Park. It was insane. He's awesome. He shows up at call to be there for my first shot, and we go and rehearse, and it's awesome. And when the time came to call action, I just sat there, and he's next to me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at this whole situation, and it's like everything just dropped on my head. I was dumbfounded by the universe that this was actually the case, and he just looked at me and smiled, and he went, say it. And I was like, action. And it was still one of the most incredible moments. And it was just that thing of confluence. Like, how did this happen? I'm grateful it happened. But yeah, so in a weird way, that was my bigger moment. But I had maybe unfounded, but I did always have a belief that if you have the story and you know what every setup is and you're there, the crew's going to follow you. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be testing and that they're not going to sit there with their arms folded at times. You get all of that. I had the DP on that very first Alfred Hitchcock episode by, I don't know, it was like night number 3, wanting to quit because I'm very hands-on. I don't just say, yeah, let's go do a nice 2-shot and I'm going to go get some coffee. I'm still a kid with a camera. I set every shot. I rehearse with a lens in my hand. I'm just who I am. And this guy wasn't used to that. And it was really funny. I've had that a few times, even in some of my movies where so my litmus test for whom I'm going to collaborate with as a DP in particular it has to feel like a friend from film school. That's not ageistic. They can be 90, but it has to be that spirit. We're in this thing together. Ooh, look what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? Ooh, look at this. But those who work in such a way that it's like, I'm the director of photography. You go sit in your chair, little man. I'm just not there.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
So that was an interesting early moment for me with my confidence, but how to keep a collaborator close without losing them.
Now, I remember years ago when Casper came out, because when Casper came out, it was a fairly big deal because CG was just starting.
We were the first character with dialogue CG animation. So Steven had done Jurassic in '93. Mm-hmm. And as that first morning when he came to my set in the kitchen, he's like, dude, you're about to blow through more shots than we did in the whole movie. And he came like week 3 and he's like, oh man, if you had known what you were getting into, you never would have said yes to this. And I laughed. He said, you're now directing these characters. There's dialogue, there's monologues, there's soliloquies. Mm-hmm. I just had to have the dudes turn and roar. And it was a deal. And it was, there was like an early glimpse of motion capture that was being experimented with, but it was not ready for prime time. So unfortunately, I didn't have that to go to. It was all here. And then I basically had to go with a old school 2D line animator. I had to go and basically, after making the movie, direct every performance in pencil sketch.
Right.
Then take those to ILM and go through the whole. So it was very handmade. Yeah.
Now, watching some behind the scenes or an interview that you did, was it true at one point that you turned it down and said, I can't do this, and that Steven had to literally call you off the ledge?
Yeah. So we met. Again, it's only he could have done this. We met because he happened to see some television that I had directed, not a Bochco show, but Gary David Goldberg, who has passed away, and he was amazing, who did Family Ties. But then Gary did a show called Brooklyn Bridge that was really remembrances from his growing up in Brooklyn in the 50s. And I happened to direct an episode. I can say this because I'm a tribe member. But Gary said, yeah, you directed the least Jewy episode that we did. And because it was an episode about this kid and his family going to Ebbets Field to try out for this thing. And it was so non-Jewy that it was more of an Americana episode. And they ran it. And it's crazy. I was just thinking about this morning. It was in Thanksgiving of '91. So 30 years ago, a month ago. They ran this episode because they needed to fill the extra half hour after the first running CBS did of E.T. So Steven's movie ran. They needed to fill a half hour. They thought, oh, this is a very heartwarming, very Americana episode. So Gary called me the next week and said, you're not going to believe the phone call I got. And I said, yeah. And he said, my friend Steven Spielberg was obviously watching his own movie and stayed through the commercial break, and he saw your show, and he called me and wanted to know who did it. So that's how I met Steven. So I went and sat down with Steven, and it's like a Schwab story. He happened to see that episode, and he walked in his office at Amblin, and, my heart's through my, mouth at that point. He's the most disarming, kind, warm human ever. So that goes away in 30 seconds. But he didn't even let me say anything. He said, okay, let me tell you about your last 3 years. And I look at him and he proceeds to tell me exactly what I had been going through as a young director under contract in television. And I'm like, my jaw's hanging open and he's loving it. And he said, yeah, I know. Because I experienced that. And I saw what you did and I could see you were making a movie, but you only had a half hour to make it. And I'd like to help you make a longer movie.
Oh my God.
And so so that's what started us. Originally, he had in mind much more reasonable first movie. It was like a little Louis Malle film. There was a thing called The Divorce Club that we were going to do that was about kids and divorce, kind of comedy drama. It was Warner Brothers. And so when he went to go make Schindler's List, I was starting to prep that movie. But I noticed some real foot dragging from the studio about hiring my crew. And so I called Lucy Fisher, who's a great producer now, was the executive. And I called her. I said, Lucy, is there a problem? She said, I think you should call your friend Steven. I don't think they want to make this movie. And so I called him in Poland. And he was like, hey, how's it going on your first movie? Isn't it amazing? Isn't it great? And I was like, dude, it's wonderful, but I don't think they want to make the movie. What? That's crazy. Oh, I'll call them. And he called Terry Semel and Bob Dale, and he called me back 2 days later. He said, I'm so sorry. You're right. They don't. They're scared of it. They think it's the subject is too sensitive. And he said, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I'm like, don't worry about it. I'll go back to my day job. Thank you for trying. And that was the timing where I went back to Bochco to direct one of the first 10 episodes of NYPD Blue. Mm-hmm. So Steven takes credit for my marriage because I ended up marrying Amy Brenneman, who was in the cast of NYPD Blue the first season. Mm-hmm. But then he called me and he said, this is months later, I was doing a pilot in Hawaii for Bochco. And he said, okay, he starts the call saying, okay, this one's really going to happen. Promise it's going to happen. We have a start date. I have a release date. And the movie's kind of, I said, the movie's what? He's like, he's like, can you say it's Casper? And I said, Casper? Like as in the friendly ghost? Yeah. But it's going to be live action. It's going to be CG. I just did these dinosaurs. You're going to be doing this and that. And I'm dumbfounded, And I said to him, you know which Brad you called. Because I was like, dude, I had no animation background. I'd done some small visual effects work in television, but I dated an animator at UCLA. It's like I really didn't have any close. And he was amazing. He was like, no, what you do, you're technically savvy. What you do and emotionally what you do and what this movie needs is you. And so, but I didn't just say yes on the call. I had to take a weekend because I was overwhelmed by the prospect of mass failure.
Yeah, because that was a big movie when it came out.
Huge movie, ended up where we knew it would be. It was like $65 million at that point. This is in 95. And I'm there in Hawaii and I'm just thinking, okay, if this movie works, Steven Spielberg presents, great. If it doesn't work, I'm like one of those first-time directors littering the beaches of Malibu who can't get a second job. And so I was really anxious about it. He did a very shrewd thing. What he did was he sent the young producer, Colin Wilson, who was going to do the movie, he sent him to Hawaii with a trunk of basically almost like illustrations from ILM about how this could work, what the modeling would be like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just driving around to scout my pilot with Colin the whole weekend saying, no, this can't work. Blah, 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 And then it was awesome because I had a conversation with now my wife, then girlfriend Amy, and she's like, okay, it's like pros and cons. Why, what are the pros? And I'm like, well, it's an incredible opportunity. And I love the fact that the movie's actually embracing this idea of loss and that there's an emotional story, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, okay, so what are the cons? I'm like, I could tank. And so that's when I just realized, okay, the only thing keeping me from this is fear. I got to fucking dive in. And so, yeah, I called him back and I said, okay, let's go. And it was just like lightning from there.
That's amazing because I still remember when that movie came out. I loved the movie when it came out. It was such a heartwarming and touching film, but it was technically, everyone was just talking about the character. And it was just a first real use of animation as a talking characters. And yeah, they were ghosts. So it's not Avatar. But without Casper, it's hard to get to Avatar. Like you need a minute.
Yeah.
It's part of the evolution, but it was so beautifully, even it still holds to this day. It still holds.
I was waiting for the big Yoda moment when I was in prep to talk about the effects and about the effects work. And we're getting closer and closer to shooting. I'm like 2 weeks out. And Steven still hasn't talked to me about, he had at one point said to me, oh yeah, I'll have the office send you a couple of tapes of work sessions with ILM. You can see how I gave them notes on the dinosaurs, and so you'll know how to do it. I was like, yeah, okay, great. But he still hadn't done it. So finally I said, hey, can we grab 5 minutes? He's like, yeah, great. And I said to him, okay, well, first of all, I think this effects budget doesn't really reflect what it's going to be. And he looked at me with that great grin. He said, I wouldn't worry about it. Just go shoot your movie. And I was like, okay, this is his like Close Encounters thinking. Like, right. I know what it's going to be. We'll pretend it's the other number, but it's really going to be this. But more importantly, he said, again, what you know how to do, you know how to stage beautifully, you know how to really, you know where the camera goes, you know what to do an elegant job in live action. Don't treat this any differently. You have to basically just don't try to like compensate. Do it just as you would, but only you're going to know where those characters are. And you're going to have to communicate that. And that was exactly the right advice. So I stopped thinking, well, I have to kind of put on a different filter. And I treated those 4 ghosts just like any other character in the movie. And I'm going to stage with them. I'm going to counter the camera. The focus shift's going to happen because there's the moment. It made me look like a madman on set because it's like orchestrating, getting the crew to understand where these ghosts were, how quick they were moving, getting the camera operator to tilt at the right moment to an empty part of the set. And then, so I was doing this all the time. It was crazy, but it felt completely natural. And that movie made me fearless because once you've done that, they can't throw anything at you that, and also I have friends who are live action directors who still have this envy of going to do a big effects driven movie.
Right.
And it's funny. For me, it's just another tool in the toolkit.
Right.
I don't thirst for that, but I know how to basically use those tools and how to communicate with lighting TDs and animators. And so it was like this incredible 2-year learning curve that was invaluable.
But I've had the pleasure of having some amazing guests on my show, and it doesn't cease to amaze me. I can probably count 20 instances that Steven Spielberg launched their careers or helped them along their career. He is one of those guiding forces in Hollywood that he doesn't get credit for. That he has helped so many filmmakers off the ground, either to start or later in their career. Or at one point, he's always kind of the man behind the curtain in a lot of ways, just giving that nudge, helping a little bit out here. And I've heard nothing but the nicest, wonderful things about, the craziest stories. It's amazing stories, and I know that's why I knew that he worked with you on Casper, but your story about him doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah. It comes out of sheer love of film and filmmaking and storytelling. And it's what keeps the ego out of it. He just wants to push good work along. A couple of movies of mine that weren't ones that he was involved with. He's just the best. Like on City of Angels, which I did over at Warner Brothers, he said, "Ooh, when's your first preview? Can I come?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, let's do that. That's gonna freak them out." And so I literally took Steven to my first, audience recruit. They didn't see him, but he wanted to come because he felt so, proprietary, and we felt like family. And indeed, like the studio was freaking out. They're like, "Oh shit!" And yet it was the best because he just had this reaction. And then he's like, "Hey, I carved out a day next week. You want me to? I'll run the picture with you. Do you want to hear some thoughts? I was like, yeah, man. He's done that a couple times, 3 times on movies where he'll come and spend the day, just run the picture in the cutting room again, offer up thoughts, and no ties to any of those. Like, here's what I see. Do with that what you will. I'm so proud of what you're doing. Blah blah blah. And that's him. That's just what he is.
And I just heard a story. A friend of mine who released a film, and he's like, dude, do you know, I just got a letter from the producer. I just got a call from my producer who got a handwritten letter from Steven saying, hey, I saw my film and I just wanted to let you know I really liked it. That was it. Like, there was nothing, I don't want to do anything with you. Like, I don't want to, I'm not, there's no agenda. Just like, I saw the movie. I thought you'd like to know that I liked it.
He's like ahead of the curve, because what I have found, I think it was after City of Angels came out one day. I remember I got a phone call and I thought it was a friend playing a prank. And it was Dustin Hoffman who was calling me. And I thought, wow, somebody's doing a really weird Dustin Hoffman imitation. Is this Brad? And I was like, and he called me because he had seen the film. And he really, really enjoyed the movie. And he said, you must like actors. Do you like actors? I feel like you like actors a lot. And so we talked, and I finally said to him, this is so kind of you to do. Do you do this? And he said, I didn't. For many years, I didn't. I was too competitive. He said, but I'm getting older, and I like to acknowledge great work. And that was the most incredible thing. And then, of course, I took that because then I built him into my next movie. But Steven has been ahead of that curve. And I think it is because he knows the pain. People forget his first directing job for him was a nightmare. The Night Gallery sent him back to Arizona for a year and a half. He was like, I'm not ready to do this. So he knows what it's like to get real support. He knows what it's like he always says it to me. When I made a film of mine, Moonlight Mile, again, it was something that I'd written, and he's like, it is your DNA. It's you through and through. I feel you in every frame. That is what we're here to do. And so it's an incredible thing. And I know he knows it, but I remind him of it yearly. I'm like, in Yiddish, like what a mitzvah it is you do for your kind every day. He loves movie, he loves television, he watches everything.
It's remarkable. And the thing I always find fascinating about him is that he's like, he doesn't have to anymore. Like he could have stopped decades ago, after E.T. You could have, after Raiders of the Lost, he didn't have to do this, but he does it without agenda, without quid pro quo. He's just truly wants to help and wants to, and he knows in a very humble way that he's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. He knows that very, very, very well, and he uses that power for good.
Well, and he'll also tell you, which is really funny. I remember between movies at one point, it was Amblin Television, or maybe it was DreamWorks Television. Then they were producing one of their first TV shows. He was like there all the time. He's like, hey, come meet me. I'm on the set of so-and-so out in Chatsworth. Come hang. And I was like, and I went there. I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, this is like my methadone. He said, if I'm not actually shooting, I need to be really close to it and get a fix. And that's his truth. So he calls the movies he produces or the TV shows his methadone. And I've always thought of that because I share that. It's my favorite thing. I'm the best director ever when I go visit a friend's set. I got no pressure. I'm really happy with the snacks. The actors look really nice. I'm really just loose,
Oh, yeah. Anytime you visit a set, you're just like, it's not my. I'm a passenger on this ship. I don't have to drive. It's great.
A friend of mine is starting a movie next week out in Boston. I'm going to go visit him, and he said, "What day are you coming?" And I said, "I think I'm coming on the blow." He goes, "Oh, that's really funny. That's guest director day. That's amazing." And so he's like, I'm like, no. Doesn't work that way, my friend.
So so you mentioned City of Angels, which I absolutely adore. I watch that film every few years because I absolutely adore that film. And it was obviously made a remake of a masterpiece of a film, which is Wings of Desire.
Yes.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. How do you approach remaking really a masterpiece? I'm not exaggerating. Wings of Desire is a masterpiece.
Absolutely. Oh, Wings of Desire. So you want to go on a bad blind date? Go see Wings of Desire, which is how I saw that film. I went on a blind date and I went to see Wings of Desire, and I couldn't move out of my seat at the end of the movie. And I looked to my left, and the woman that I was there with clearly was just looking for her popcorn remnants or whatever it was. And there was like no response. And I couldn't, that was a really short date after that, you know? It was poetry, and it was just life humor and observing nuance. And it was an incredible movie. The only way you make that film, when we did, is you can't approach it as an actual remake, because if it were, what are you doing? You know, you can't do it. And so when I got a call about the film, I was really interested. My agent then said, "Oh, Don Steele, producer Don Steele, is doing a remake of Wings of Desire." And I was like, what? I couldn't put those elements together. Don, who's been gone now 20 years, was arguably one of the most commercial movie brains as a studio head and then as a producer. So I went in to meet her, and what I realized, and I say this lovingly, I don't know if she ever saw the original film. And that's what set me free. I was like, oh, okay. She's thinking of this as a high concept premise, and had engaged Dana Stevens, who's a wonderful writer. Dana as well was late to the, Dana was not a vendor's aficionado, was not. So they were freed up at the initial stage of development by not chasing that, but by trying to come up with a story. And I knew that for me, if I could bring the emotional response I had to Vim's film and some of the tonal play, but also be able to just own it and just think, again, we're not doing, because obviously Wings of Desire is like gossamer threads. It's there's that much story. And the incredible thing is, so Nick Cage and I had a real instinct, because I remember asking Dawn Steele, I said, so tell me about your conversations with Vim. What has that been like? And she's like, oh, I haven't talked to him. And I was like, really? You've never engaged with? She goes, oh, no. I was like, wow. And so when Nick had signed on, he and I both were like, we'd really love to get the script to Vim and just sort of, who knows, get any thoughts, but more so just reach out and say we want there to be a continuity, because we really are so indebted to the initial impulse he had. And he was amazing. And he read it quickly and responded. And then he ended up becoming like a beautiful kind of godparent to the movie from that point on.
Or an angel, if you will.
Or an angel, a guardian angel, a German guardian angel. He was great. But what he said to me and Nick at that point, which was amazing, he said, this is crazy. Do you know that in my original concept for the movie, it was going to take place in a hospital, and the female lead, of course, who's a trapeze artist, was going to be a doctor. He said, my dad was a surgeon. That's where I wanted it to take place. We couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford a location. and we couldn't afford it. That's why I think about it. That's why she's a trapeze artist. We just put a tent up. And we were like, oh my God, that's the beauty of film. It's like, you can't imagine that film any other way. And the visual conceit of flight and all that goes, no, because that was budget. We couldn't afford it. So Vim came to my first test screening with his wife, and they were fantastic because the way test screenings go, the lights come up at the end. You as the filmmakers at the studio, you leave the room. Everybody gets handed their little note cards and they fill out shit. And Vim and Donata, his wife, were really funny because nobody knew who he was. So they're like spying on people's cards. And then they would come running out to me. Ooh, it's looking really good. They like this and they like that. And then he'd run back in. So he was awesome through the whole process. But again, didn't expect it to be, a Xerox copy. Appreciated that we weren't just doing that, but still felt really happy to be connected to the film. And that was the only way I was able to do it. Otherwise, it would have just been.
Yeah, because you can't. I had John Badham on. And I talked to him about Point of No Return. I'm like, of course. How do you take La Femme Nikita and like redo it? Like, but he didn't have a guardian angel from France. He was on his own.
I know, John, and I know what you're talking about. Yes.
John's I love John. I absolutely adore John.
Good. And you've seen his book, which I contributed. He's written. He cares so much about the craft of directing and what directors go through, and he's the best.
Absolutely, no question. Now, how do you approach taking a popular children's series and turning it into a series of unfortunate events? Like because that was at that point in your career the biggest budget you've ever worked with at that point, correct?
Yeah, no, for sure. Casper and City of Angels were probably within $5 million of each other, somewhere in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Lemony Snickett by over twofold, partly because Scott Rudin and Barry Sonnenfeld had been in early development on trying to make the movie at Paramount. And they spent some money. And the studio got very scared because the script, it's interesting. Handler is a friend of mine, Daniel Handler, who's the real Lemony Snickett. And Daniel had done an adaptation, but the adaptation was like bonkers. It really wasn't honoring his own work, which amazed me. And I think because he's so prolific and he's so imaginative, I think he thought, why am I just going to go recreate what I've done? I want to go do some other stuff. So what I remember asking if I could read where they had been headed, and it was crazy town, but it was also very expensive. So that's how DreamWorks got involved. Was they basically decided they were going down the wrong path at Paramount, reached out to DreamWorks to partner on the movie, and it was mutually decided that they would bring on a whole new filmmaking team, new script, new director. And so I was in Europe, was with Dustin Hoffman. I was in Europe promoting Moonlight Mile when I got a call from Walter Parks, who was then running DreamWorks under Steven. And he said, "Are you familiar with these books?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Go get your hands on them and call me back." And I went to the biggest toy store, Hadley's, I think it's called, in London, and bought the first 3 books. And was so, again, for me, it's like tone and character. And I was so blown away by, the essential premise of those books, which is that the kids are the adults are idiots. And that there's a real straight look at darkness, that there's a real straight look at loss and perseverance and what that means. And so I was reading these, and just the sense of wisdom, huge intelligence, tone. I just thought it was fantastic. So I called him back and I said, "This is great. What's the situation?" And he said, "Well, when you come back, come sit with me and Steven. But if you want to do this, we should do this. And so that began the process. There's 13 books. At that point, there weren't 13. But it was decided that we would tackle the first 3. But by nature, they are like serials. They're episodic.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the biggest challenge was going to be making it still feel like a 3-act film and not just like, and then we're here, and then we're here. Which some of it is naturally still that way, but that there had to be some sort of a bigger arc. So we spent a good bit of time, and thankfully Handler was willing to come back into the process because I didn't want to lose his voice. I didn't want to lose his, just that sort of sweet and sour thing that he does. And then we had, but yeah, I mean, it was a very expensive movie. I asked Sherry Lansing, not to make my life harder, but I said to her when I met her, don't you want to, frankly, given the money you're spending, don't you want to do, it's Back to the Future 2 and 3. Don't you want to do 2 back to back and amortize the cost? These sets are going to be insane. And blah, 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 blah. And Sherry's awesome. Sherry's like, oh no, honey, I'm very superstitious. But I'm too superstitious. Let's let the first one come out and then we'll decide. I was like, okay. And I had, over the course of early, you pick up one of those books. There's a sense of it, everything being handmade, the illustrations.
Yeah.
And I wanted the film to feel like an illustration. And so when I started scouting and trying to kind of design the film with Rick Heinrichs, who's awesome, we were actually going out into the real world looking for location, and we both were like, can't do it. This is Night of the Hunter. We have to find a way to make everything feel handmade, at times more 2-dimensional than 3-dimensional. That means we have to control it all. That means we're going to have to be on set the whole time, including for exterior.
Wow.
And so that's how we approached it. And again, the studio backed it. But yeah, it was an expensive movie.
It was. Now, how do you direct a force of nature like Jim Carrey? I mean, obviously he's very similar in energy to Robin Williams. Like this kind of kinetic energy that you just like, you can't control it. All you could do is corral it.
Well, what you do, it would be like if you did a 2-hour interview and you hopefully made great prompts and let that interview go and then sit down together and say, that's salient. That's great. This, not so much. What I realized early with Jim, well, 2 things. What people don't know about Jim Carrey, everything seems like Robin Williams, like, oh my God. So he is a preparer and he feels most grounded and safe when he's prepared. So what I realized was like, okay, how do I do that and still capture all that's Jim? And what I realized was I want to basically get the most out of his freedom and then create. So normally when you do makeup, hair, wardrobe tests on a film, there's no sound recorded. You just put an actor up. And I had this crazy idea that I got from actually John Schlesinger doing this on Midnight Cowboy, which is I brought the sound mixer and I decided to interview each of these potential characters that Jim was going to do, meaning Jim's Olaf, and then Jim's, Stefano, and then I'd ask him about public policy. I'd ask him about his thoughts on secondary education, on Las Vegas. And he just had a great time. And we were recording it. And we looked at each other after the first day and thought, it's all in there. That's amazing. It's all in there. And so what we did was I went and took from these really, hopefully well prompted, but great improvs. I took the best of what we thought could play within the story. Because I did bring it around often to the kids and to the situation and what he's going to do with the money, and Titanic sucked. I could do better. And so what you do is it's less hemming him in and more like, here's your pasture. Let's go play. And I'm going to take your best moves and we're going to bring that into the story. And so that's what we did. We brought all that material back into the script. So the script, what you have on screen, is all material that derived from improv that we did well ahead of the time. And again, it's like a kid, teenagers with a camera. He and I responded on a really fundamental level, like pals. And I realized that I had to make him feel safe, but also not just pull big surprises, but that let's go through, let's prepare. He would know if he had to work the staircase in that mansion, he knew how many steps there were, how many he was going to take before a gesture. And if, God forbid, the night before the construction crew changed the number of steps, that's where he'd get thrown. Because it was like, no, I'm a dancer. I'm so prepared. And so if you know that's the animal you're dealing with, you lean into it and you make him feel safe. The studio got very scared. They got scared often through the process about, the reason kids love those books and why they love the series is because it's super honest. It goes really dark. They got very scared of that at times. And like the 11th hour, they got a little worried about Count Olaf's makeup. And I said to them, oh, we're past that point, and this is exactly what it's supposed to be, and I forget what they did, and they asked Walter Parks to see if there was anything he could do, and I was like, oh, this is not going to end well, because we've committed, it's going to get in his head and it's going to blow up. And our first day of shooting, Jim never got on camera because I think one of the producers had gotten in his ear, like, well, maybe we can have a little less darkness under the eyes. And I remember saying to the producers, like, that is going to come at a cost. You wait. And sure enough, I went into Jim's trailer and he was like, wow, are we just making a mistake? What's going on? And I said,
too late.
Absolutely not. Yeah. You are the character. This is the makeup. Go home. Today was a great rehearsal for putting on your makeup for 3.5 hours. Go home, get some sleep. We're going to start tomorrow morning. Fuck them. And that's what we did.
Yeah. And that's awesome. That's an awesome story. Now, is there, as directors, there's always that day, and it could be at the beginning of your career, it could be at the end of your career, it could be in the middle of your career, on a day on the set when the entire world is coming crashing down around you. And you're like, oh my God, like the actor won't come out. Like you were saying before we started, like the actor's drunk. She's getting a divorce. We're losing the sunlight. The camera fell in the lake. And every minute that goes by is literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars going by. What was that day for you? And how did you overcome that obstacle that day?
Wow. It's so funny because I'm smiling when you're saying that day. It's more like days.
Every day. I ask that question often, and it was like, you mean every day?
Well, I'll tell you. Here's a really. I think I'm happy that I don't have a litany of them in my head. Partly because, listen, the days that you think are going to be a cakewalk slam you like a ton of bricks.
Right.
And then you're like, holy fuck, how did this get so hard? And then the days that you're anticipating hell become like joyous. So it happens throughout the process. I think as you do it more, I always say it's a shot at a time. You go one shot at a time. When I would in my golf cart drive myself to set on Lemony Snickett, I think we shot 146 days on that movie. It was endless.
Oh my God.
146 days. And I remember like a third of the way into it thinking, this could really become overwhelming. And I remember just driving my cart with the happiest moment was like driving my golf cart to the stage with my little warm cup of coffee. And I thought, I think I'm just like a miner. I go into the mine and I come out with film each day. I can't even begin to think about the end of this journey because it will take me out. I just have to go in and really concentrate one shot at a time, one performance at a time. And that's how you can persevere and not get overwhelmed. I over the years have gone to sit, just again, my method done. I'll go sit with Steven on a set. And it's what's always given me the joy of one shot at a time. Because as much as people like to prepare, he prepares, but he still comes up with it. It's like jazz. He comes up with it a shot at a time on set. And if you do that, you could be shooting 10 days or 100 days. And as long as you're getting some sleep and you're eating okay, and you believe in what you're doing, you can get through it.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
The one I remember one day that was pretty amazing on Lemony Snickett. That is about as close to what you're describing as I've probably ever come. Where we were doing a sequence with Billy Connolly, and there's a character in the books, the incredibly deadly viper. It's this huge viper who, of course, is harmless, but looks really mean. So we had a giant prosthetic version of the viper created just to basically be able to rehearse and for the camera operator and scale. And the babies, these were babies who were playing Sonny. They were 14 months old. They were twins when we made the movie. And one of them, on the rehearsal, though I always shoot my rehearsal. So everything's always on film or digital. Because why not? It's like, I'm not going to lose a great performance. So I don't like just a camera rehearsal. I always roll. And it gets everybody focused. So we rolled on the rehearsal, and the grip who was sort of manipulating this huge fake snake got a little too overzealous in his performance, and like went, and the gate of this pen that the snake was in was, flies open, goes right at the baby who's being held by the kids, and it's in the movie. She looks and screams bloody murder, and she's toast. She's like off. They got to take her off the set. She was scarred. I still feel bad. She was scarred from that for the rest of the movie. Most of the rest of the movie was her twin sister, who was just like a joy baby. She, though, freaked out. And at that point, when you're dealing with infants, you only have so many minutes on set.
Right.
Her sister had already worked that day. I had nowhere else to go. There wasn't another scene we could jump into. It was one of those where it was just like, and I remember it was that moment. It's like, holy shit. I turned to my AD, who's done every movie with me, and she's amazing, Michelle Vanitas. I turned to her with this look, and I said, I need to take a walk. I've never in my career left my set. I never leave the camera. Mm-hmm. I was so overwhelmed by this wall we had walked into that I literally walked out the stage at the Zip Paramount. And, on a big movie, it feels like 1,000 radios all around. There's PAs, there's transposers.
Right.
And what I hear as I'm walking out of the stage and I'm walking down, I hear, don't let him get to Melrose. Don't let him get to Melrose. They literally thought I was going to walk and never come back. And I don't know if I didn't think about it, but it was amazing. So I got like halfway down and I took a deep breath. I'm like, okay, again, shot at a time. It's their movie. Sometimes too, in my head, I think it's their movie too. Meaning I take it all on my head. I take responsibility for everything. But everybody has come together. They want to tell this very challenging story with real babies and real this and that. It's their movie too. We'll figure it out, And the more you do it, this friend of mine starting this movie in Boston next week, I was mentioning, a lot of it takes place at a boarding school. He just lost 2 weeks out his primary location, like incredible primary school location, all the architecture, because of COVID. The board of directors, I guess, got together and were like, no, can't do it. And I was on the phone with him when he got the other call on the other line, and he's like, and I checked in with him the next morning. He's like, you know what? This is what happens. We do this long enough, we kind of get unflappable. And you do. it's not that you don't care. You just know there's going to be a solution. And as always happens in film, you look back and think it couldn't have been any other way. So there's a faith in the process.
Yeah.
Casting and recasting.
No, you're absolutely right. There is that thing that you're like, oh, why did I lose that? Well, like the trapeze thing in Wings of Desire. Perfect example. Like, I mean, he wanted a hospital, but he couldn't afford it. So we got the trapeze. It is such an insanity that we do. I call it the beautiful sickness because it is, because it is, and you know, because once you get bitten by that bug, you can't get rid of it ever. It's always inside you, and it's beautiful. But I've spoken to so many filmmakers over the course of my career that there's an insanity to what we do. We have gone to the circus. We've ran away with the circus.
Yeah, and it's a compulsion.
Yeah,
and there's and I've had it again since I was younger. So when I was making my little Super 8 films, I lived in a neighborhood that had turned over, and really there were not a lot of younger families. There was one kid next door to me who was younger. He was the only actor I had. He was in every movie that I made. And he got really smart at one point. He started saying, I'm a little tired today. It's like you hold his hand out. I have to give him $5. And, you know, it's my first time dealing with unions. And but it was funny because the compulsion, he would look at me some days and go, oh, no, you got another one. Because you just get bitten and you want to tell another story and you want to go do that thing. And I always say, with different filmmakers, I can look at their movies. Paul Anderson, another fantastic director from the Valley. We are Valley people here in LA. I adore Licorice Pizza. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and I said, he wanted to make a movie. Meaning he was very excited to create a feeling. It wasn't that he was sitting there chiseling out a story that was just like this and just like that. He got really excited to go make a movie. And sometimes our movies are that. It's like, I want to go make a movie and I'm going to find enough that I can care about to hang on this movie and just enjoy the process. Peter Weir, mm-hmm. who among, the pantheon of living directors is one of my faves. Mm-hmm. And I sought him out after Casper, actually, because I was going to go to Australia. He happened to be in LA and he's become this incredible, again, friend and mentor. He said a really brilliant thing he made a movie called Green Card with Depardieu and the movie flopped.
And McDowell.
Yeah, that's right. And the movie flopped and just got kind of panned. And he just had the greatest attitude. And he said of it later, I realized that the audience was in the wrong place. They should have been with us while we were making the movie because the process was so pleasurable. We had such a great time. And I guess I wanted them there, maybe less so sitting in a theater watching the movie. And I knew exactly what he meant, which is, sometimes it's just, I want to go and have this great experience. And so, but it's all from that root compulsion, and part of your job, and people do it with more or less success, is how do I manage that compulsion and have a life? It's not for a reason that most of these marriages go down with filmmakers and other artists. And it's like you have to find a balance, and we're always working at that. But the bug is still always there. And, it's this, I call it the great harumph. It's this creative harumph where you're unsettled because you're searching for that next thing to just lock into.
And I'd imagine, being someone like yourself who's had success as a director in your career, when you start getting those first big jobs, when you're on the set of Casper and on the set of City of Angels, and that I guess has to amplify because the high is so much higher for someone directing with all the toys in the world, like on Lemony Snicket's. That high must be pretty immense for someone like yourself, as opposed to an independent filmmaker who's used to making $100,000, $150,000 movies. Don't get me wrong; it still could be a high for them as well. But I can only imagine the level of like height you get your movies get released, you get huge audiences, you're working with the best collaborators in the world. You have Steven Spielberg sitting there visiting the set. I could imagine as a director, that compulsion must be even More so. I think that's probably why you do so much television now, because television, you're constantly working as opposed to features that take forever.
Well, this is right. The pilots, and I love making pilots because pilots are little movies that have to be done by May 2nd. And they're not going to wait for the actor because they can't. They have to have it on their schedule. No, it's true. So I'll tell you, and I remember this while I was shooting Casper, Kevin Reynolds, who made, among other things, Waterworld. So Kevin's an old friend because he married one of my oldest friends. Kevin was on the Universal lot, and I don't know if he was in post on Waterworld or
95. I think he was in post around that time.
Post. And I remember he came by, and I was like, famous in Waterworld, the first movie to ever break the $100 million figure on a budget. And I said, God, that just must be amazing and crazy and great and challenging. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? It's still all the same problems. He said, I'm still fighting to make my days. I still don't have enough for certain things I want to do. He said, so yes, it's great. He said, but don't have an illusion that it just suddenly changes. And so when you're talking about the size of the movie stuff too, I'll tell you where we're all in the same spot in a beautiful way. First time we walk in with that first audience, we're sitting there. If the movie costs $2 million, $200 million, or $20,000, your heart is here because how are they going to receive this? How are they going to laugh? Are they going to cry? Yeah. That's the great equalizer. And for me is still what I'm most excited about. It's one thing to sit and just go make a film for myself, but it is an audience experience that I crave. Nothing is better, or it can be worse, but usually nothing is better. And that's kind of an interesting equalizer. The rest of the sizes, again, can be great. At times it can be like I say, like, oh shit, I just got to put on my mining cap because this thing is
cut wood, carry water. Cut wood, carry water.
That's it. Shot at a time.
Cut wood, carry water. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions. Ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Okay, so you remember that great line from Glenn Ross?
Always be closing.
Closing?
Yeah.
Mine is always be writing. And if you can't write, always be dating a writer. Seriously, because in the end, it is all about content. And for somebody trying to break in, somebody trying to sustain. So it's the Rocky story. It's like Stallone saying, yeah, you can make my movie, but I'm going to star in it. And the only way for filmmakers to get to guarantee their place, unless they're coming off of, John Watts' last movie, the only way you're going to guarantee your place is primacy of, and this was Steven has said to me many times too. It's like, that's the thing. When it's your baby, they may not want to make it, but if they make it, it's only going to be with you. Always be writing, always be dreaming. And like I say, truly, if you're not a writer, then find somebody to collaborate with. It's going to be I will say without a doubt, my most enjoyable experiences, be they large or small, have been on the films that I've written. I've done both, and I've loved my other movies too, but the experience of it, I'm the most free in a weird way. I'm not like, I remember Dustin Hoffman on Moonlight Mile was waiting to see if I was going to be like Mr. Letter Perfect. And I was like, oh God, no, because I've already written it. Now we can play if we need to play. But it's always, and the other thing too, it's like when I was growing up, soccer player, we used to watch these Pepsi training films that they would screen, and they were always starring Pele.
Of course.
And Pele was always basically dribbling a grapefruit on a beach in Brazil. And his whole thing was, anybody can do this with just a grapefruit. And I think of that all the time, which is if I have that creative, to have to wait to pull together $100 million, $10 million, 200,000. If I have to wait to be creative because of other people's money, I'm going to be doomed and bitter. And so writing gives me the control. There's nothing but keystrokes or a piece of paper or journal that's going to stop me from and Steven has a great phrase, Spielberg. He talks about your writing eye and your directing eye, and he has said to me, that the reason he knows I love to write is it's my directing eye getting to play, but play on the page. So that's the key. Is I can't stress it enough. Every time I go back to film schools to talk to young people, I'm like, you have to be a creator.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say probably it's an ongoing lesson. You can begin to equate stubbornness with, I guess, integrity and stubbornness for many go hand in hand. And I can be super stubborn. When I want to do something, I'm going to get it done. It may take 2 years, 10 years. I'm going to get it done. And it's funny. I have 3 movies that I've made, each of which had that about it. Moonlight Mile, I wrote a first draft of in 1993. I made it in 2001. 10 Items or Less, similar. A picture I did with Ben Kingsley, Ordinary Man. It by the time things got together, fell apart. So I'm stubborn. But what I've realized is that I can't be singular and stubborn, meaning be open to, I was always of the belief that I have to just stay on one project. I can't be distracted by others. And the challenge there is that's fine if you literally are prepared to not go and do something for a long period of time, because there are elements that are out of your control. And so I'm both creatively staunch, but it's like you can juggle more plates in a successful and enjoyable way. The more you do it, you get confident. So I might be developing a limited series that might go, but I'm also out to cast on another movie that it would have been once upon a time. I would have only just sat and waited for that cast to come together on that movie. It was Moonlight Mile, and suddenly, or the money to come with it. And so suddenly it was from 2008 to by the time we released the movie, 98 to 2002. That was like almost 4 years. And on the one hand, like Peter Weir had always said to me, make sure you live your life. Some people just go movie to movie to movie. You need to take time and read and hike and listen to music and fill yourself. So I have both in me. I can wait, but I've learned to not cut off other opportunities. And so that initially would have been probably more of a challenge for me. And I have a bigger view of it now.
And what is what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Oh man. Well, as every filmmaker will tell you, it's like, don't ask me that question. But I'm going to tell you, obviously, Jaws is what lit my little fuse. You can ask that question and get a different answer
every day.
I'm going to tell you, I love, again, talking about Peter Weir, in a more commercial film of his. Okay, I'm cheating. I'm giving you 2. I love Gallipoli and I love Witness. Witness is just this remarkable movie. It's and then I'm going to give you only because I recently saw it again and I was like, God, I wish I had made that movie. I'm going to mention a Zhang Yimou movie that most people have not seen and they must see it. And it's the smallest movie he ever made. It's called Not One Less. He made it with non-actors in a little Chinese village, and it is the most breathtaking, beautiful. It's like not even verite, because it's still beautifully controlled the way he can, but it's what movies can be. I come back to it from time to time to, reinvigorate me. I'm a big Ozu fan,
Mm-hmm.
and I love Floating Weeds. Floating Weeds is a movie that I come back to for tone, for just exactly where that camera is on that 50 millimeter lens. So those are movies that always stay with me. But I do have those movies that I call like, oh, that's just a perfect movie that you can go back to from time to time. And they can be indifferent. They can be All the President's Men. It can be The Verdict. It can be, you name it. So I have a one of those revolving CD changers. It's not too fixed.
Exactly. It's constantly rotation. You got rotation.
But it's just, it's honestly to tweak myself. It's to go, God, that's beauty. Every time I see something that I enjoy, it makes me want to go that day and make a movie. And that's what it is.
My friend, I appreciate you coming on the show, Brad. I really do. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I hope it's inspired a few people to go out there and make a movie and scared the hell out of others to not make movies. But I truly appreciate your time, my friend. Please continue making the work that you do and good work. So I appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate it too. This was fun. Thanks so much.
I want to thank Brad so much for coming on the show and dropping his knowledge bombs on the tribe today. Thank you again so much, Brad. If you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, head over to the show notes at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/171. And if you haven't already, please head over to screenwritingpodcast.com, subscribe, and leave a good review for the show. It truly helps us out a lot. Thank you so much for listening, guys. As always, keep on writing no matter what. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.